Paul Ryan, for the most part, maintaining his cool, not interrupting Joe Biden, but Joe Biden, sort of what we saw Mitt Romney do the first time around, always getting the last word, always making sure that no point went unresponded to. Paul Ryan looking maybe a bit more respectful, but perhaps in the minds of some viewers, perhaps a bit more weak. We'll find out. Let's bring back in our panel now. Senior writer for the Weekly Standard, Steve Hayes, and former Howard Dean campaign manager, Joe Trippi. On this set, we were discussing whether Joe Biden was having an Al Gore moment. Did he go too far with the smirking such that the substance will be undermined? Joe?
I think he had a very strong debate, but was diminished. I thought personally was diminished by the smirking, and he overdid it. I think, look, he surprised me on how aggressive he was and undefensive he was on the economy, bringing up the 47%. I was very surprised, though, about how strong Ryan was on foreign policy. It's going to be interesting how this all plays out, because I think women were up for grabs here, and I think Biden really scored points, but the last thing we need is another war, another ground war in the Middle East. I mean, there were different issues where I think he really pushed hard, but I don't know about the likability of that smirking and some of and how he sort of overdid. I think it was I found it condescending and overdone.
Steve?
Well, there was a moment, I've been talking about the demeanor. There was a moment at the very end, maybe when most voters weren't paying as close attention. Paul Ryan started his closing statement and gave what I thought was a very sincere thank you to Martha Raddatz, to the crowd, and to Joe Biden. And when he thanked Joe Biden, Biden was smirking. And I just thought that came across as very disrespectful and sort of symbolic of the way that Joe Biden handled the rest of the night. On substance, I was struck by the same thing that Brett was with respect to Libya. It seemed that the vice president was criticizing the intelligence community in some ways by not getting them as much information as he thought. I mean, he blamed all of the false statements of the Obama administration on the intelligence community and seemed to raise questions about the competence of the intelligence community. And then moments later, in a discussion about Iran, he said, we will know when they go to a breakout for the bomb. It seems to me there's major tension between those two statements. On the one hand, suggesting they're not competent enough to know what happened on the ground in Libya. On the other, saying they will know for sure if Iran decides to go for the bomb.
You know, Joe, on domestic policy, we heard Joe Biden do what his boss, Barack Obama, did not, which is continually hammer that 47% comment that Mitt Romney went, and was talking about how Mitt Romney believes that 30% of the American people are takers. That's my mom, that's my dad, he said.
The Obama campaign has to be very happy with what Biden did there. I mean, I was surprised that the president didn't do it in the last debate. I think Biden really made a lot of strong points tonight. Again, I just don't know whether did women find him likable or not. And the other thing, though, is I thought about it midway through the debate. The Obama campaign may not care. I mean, they may have sent him out there to really drive through these points, hammer them. No one's going to vote for president of the United States based on whether they like Joe Biden or not. That's not what's going to happen here. I would have made him a little bit more likable, but it may have just been about scoring points, about really pushing through, bringing up the 47% and really driving it.
And Paul Ryan had the last word on that, saying, I think the vice president knows that sometimes the words don't always come out the right way on that 47%. So we're getting a little bit of a preview now on how they may handle that. We'll be back to you in a minute. Brett?
All right, Megan, one thing was clear. The vice president had more energy than the president did in his first debate. Let's go down to Greta Van Susteren in Washington for what she thought of the debate, and she has what's coming up on the record as well.
Thank you, Brett. And I have Brit Hume right here with me. Brit, in watching the show tonight, what do you think that the independents and undecided saw at home?
Well, it all depends on what they think of Joe Biden and his demeanor. It seems to me that looked at, if you read the transcript, you might well conclude that the vice president had a very strong debate, that he had a lot to say, that he was strongly critical of Governor Romney and his program, that he held his own. But that's not all there is to it. We had the split screen, much as we did during the presidential debate. And what you saw while Paul Ryan was talking, as others have pointed out, was smirking, laughing, smiling, mugging, by the vice president. And my sense about it was that it was so compelling that people probably couldn't take their eyes off of it. And so it'll come down to whether people thought that was attractive or not. Myself, I didn't. I thought it was unattractive. I thought it was rude, and I have a feeling it'll come across to an awful lot of people as rude. It looked like a cranky old man to some extent, debating a polite young man.
Well, it's funny you say it. This morning I gave a speech, and I told everybody in the audience, I happen to really like Joe Biden, and I happen to really like Paul Ryan. And I said to the group that these are the two nicest men that you will see in Washington. They're very nice. You disagree with them, but very nice. I thought that Ryan was respectful. He said, thanks, Joe, at the end. He was polite and respectful. But the smiles, the sneers, and the my friend stuff, I was surprised. It made Vice President Joe Biden, someone who I typically like, I thought he was very unlikable. I thought it was, I was surprised that I didn't like him.
On a personal basis, I've known Joe Biden a very long time. He's a very nice man. And I've often said of him that if you're sitting talking to him and you told him you needed his shirt, he'd start taking his shirt off. That's the way he is on a personal basis. But his public discourse has always been marked by a couple of things. He has this nervous mannerism, which is a smile, and he flashes it all the time, even sometimes when it's inappropriate. I think it's a nervous tic. Tonight, it was out there for all to see time and time again, and it was more than that. It was laughing and derisive sneering, as you suggested. He also said a couple of things. He said at one point that when he was asked about the need for more security in Benghazi, we were not told, he said, that more security was needed. I don't think that's true. The other thing he said was that the $716 billion that goes in the books as a Medicare cut was actually being applied to Medicare. That's not true either. Now, I don't know whether the fact checkers will get after him about that, or whether anyone will notice. I
think it's interesting. That's where it gets down in the weeds, and it's like it's easy for your mind to sort of get lost as you're listening to them fighting over the weeds in terms of the numbers of Medicare and taxes. The likability thing, I actually think is so important, and that's why I asked you what are independents and decides. That's what they saw. Well, they don't know what we think about him and think he's a nice guy. The rest of people saw him as a sneering rude.
Actually, Greta, I think what probably may have happened tonight is the belief on the left and among a lot of Democrats was that Mitt Romney had sort of taken over the first debate, overwhelmed Barack Obama, who was more reserved, and dominated the whole affair. And one senses that perhaps this is what Vice President Biden was doing tonight, to try to dominate the debate. And one could argue that he did that. But Mitt Romney did not seem to me, and I don't think to very many people, to have been rude or overbearing or unpleasant or condescending in his behavior toward the moderator and toward the president. One senses that a lot of people will feel that that's exactly how Joe Biden seemed tonight.
I believe that I have ever seen a debate in which one participant was as openly disrespectful of the other as Biden was to Paul Ryan tonight. And that's what it was. You can talk about the smirks, the smiles, the head shaking, the mugging. It was openly contemptuous and disrespectful. And it wasn't just the facial gestures, it was also the words. In the course of the night, he dismissed various arguments by Ryan as malarkey, bunch of stuff. I don't know what these guys are talking about, loose talk and bluster. It was really quite an extraordinary, and I have to say, from my experience, unprecedented performance in a presidential or vice presidential debate by one of the participants on the specific
and Chris,
issues.
You know what? Let me just interrupt you real quick. It's what was amazing was some of the topics were when he was laughing and smirking. One of them I noticed was Iran. When Paul Ryan was talking about Iran. Now, listen, they may disagree about how long it takes Iran to get a nuclear weapon or how much of a threat Iran is, but clearly Iran is a threat eventually, and the laughing and the smiling, some would think perhaps that would be misplaced at that point. It's interesting. There are a lot of people all over reacting to that.
Yeah, in fairness, I don't think that he was laughing about the situation in Iran. I think he was laughing, portraying that poor, dim Paul Ryan didn't know what he was talking about and clearly didn't understand the situation. I thought on some of the specific issues, Libya and taxes, I thought that Ryan had the clear edge. On entitlements and Afghanistan, I thought Biden scored. I would also say one thing about Ryan. Well, I was told going in that Ryan was going to make this a big debate about big issues, and it was only in the last 10 or 15 minutes that he made this talk about a big choice. Here's where Obama's going to take you, here's where he's taken you already, and here's where we're going to take you. But I thought on a lot of these issues, he got too far into the policy weeds and wasn't big enough. Now, let's do a little fact-checking, and the biggest issue seemed to be what the vice president had to say about Libya. Let's take a clip from the debate.
The intelligence community told us that. As they learned more facts about exactly what happened, they changed their assessment. That's why there's also an investigation headed by Tom Pickering, a leading diplomat from the Reagan years, who is doing an investigation as to whether or not there are any lapses, what the lapses were, so that they will never happen again.
And they wanted more security there.
Well, we weren't told they wanted more security again. We did not know they wanted more security again.
Now, there are two issues there. The first one is that Biden claims that it was the intelligence community that told them that it was a spontaneous protest. Now, there are sort of two sides to this story. The State Department says that it never concluded that the consulate attack in Libya stemmed from protests over an American-made video. And in fact, they invoked a certain act of terror warnings at the very beginning so that they could do that. On the other hand, I have to say that the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, originally said, and I have to quote here, in the immediate aftermath, there was information that led us to assess that the attack began spontaneously following protests earlier that day at our embassy. We provided that initial assessment to the executive branch officials, so Biden has some backup there. On the question of we were not told, maybe Biden wasn't told, maybe Obama wasn't told, but in a hearing yesterday, it was made clear repeatedly that the State Department was asked repeatedly by security officials on the ground for more security, and in fact, one regional security person who was eventually withdrawn from Libya said, I was so frustrated more with the State Department that I came to feel that I was dealing with the Taliban inside the State Department. So no question that whether Biden knew or not, the top State Department officials knew that officials on the ground felt there was a security breach and a very dangerous situation for our diplomats in Libya. Brat?
Yeah, and right, Chris, you're exactly right. And we reported that intelligence officials privately were saying they knew within 24 hours about the terrorist attack, despite even after what we heard from State this week. Chris Wallace in Washington, thank you. Just want to point out, Megan, Jim Messina just moments ago in the spin room right by you is just saying that, asked about Joe Biden smiling and laughing, he's a happy warrior for the middle class. And asked if that's appropriate, he said, he's a happy warrior. Repeated a couple times.
The spinners are here in full force behind me, Brett. There's more spinning going on here than in a Whirlpool store. All right, I'll leave it to Greg Gutfeld. I tried to be Greg Gutfeld unsuccessfully.
That was a good effort.
Coming up, a man who requires no imitation, Charles Krauthammer. He will be here live with his take on the evening. Right after.
You know what strikes me in this conversation? Yeah. You guys aren't talking about the debate that took place tonight because you don't think that, that Representative Ryan did very well.
There are two polls that came out. Here's what I want to say about the debate. You know what's, as I think about this more and more, as I watch a rude, condescending, interruptive, mean-spirited vice president tonight, this is not going to play well. I'll tell you right now, and already two polls show that Ryan won this debate. I think